Well, I've got to be on my way. I'm swimming home.
You're swimming home?
I figured out there's a river of pools all the way to my house.
Crazy idea.
I think it's a brilliant idea.
Is there anything else I can do for you?
Oh, yes. Hand me my clothes, will you?
Oh, David, they aren't here. They're being pressed.
What?
I mean, the gardener's taken them into town.
Oh, well, stop him. I can't wait. I must leave here immediately.
David, you can't leave without your clothes.
Well, I know that. But where are you going?
I'm going to take a shower.
Oh, Susan, don't leave me here like this.
Don't be impatient, David. We'll talk it over after I've finished. Everything's going to be all right.
On them second-floor lintels between the lally columns. Do you want we should rabbit them or not?
The second-floor lallies?
Second-floor lintels between the lallies.
Oh, the lintels between the lallies.
Yeah, from the blueprints you can't tell. You want they should be rabbited?
No, I guess not.
Okay, you're the doctor. Hey, fellas! You got any of them rabbited lintels set? Rip them out! I'm wishing that I may. I'm wishing that I might have the wish.
Ah, you know, you're a strange, sad case, girlie. Do you know that?
No. No, tell me, doctor.
Well, to begin with, you're really a nice gal, full of normal desires. But I can tell you what's happening to them.
What?
They're being slowly strangled to death.
Well, it's murder.
How do you do, Mr. Green?
How do you do?
In answer to your question, may I inquire, are you? That is, do you follow the Hebrew religion yourself? Or is it that you just want to make sure?
I've asked a simple question. I'd like to have a simple answer.
Well, you see, we do have a very high-class clientele, and, well, naturally.
Then you do restrict your guests to Gentiles.
Well, I would say that, Mr. Green. But in any event, there seems to be some mistake, because we don't have a free room in the entire hotel. But if you'd like, perhaps I can fix you up at the Brewster Hotel down near the station.
I'm not staying at the Brewster. Look, I'm Jewish, and you don't take Jews. That's it, isn't it?
I never said that.
If you don't accept Jews, say so.
Hello. America took this great bestseller to its heart because it could be the story of any American.
He'd notice, all right. Oh, boy, would he notice. I'll have the Connecticut look.
Co-starring Carolyn Jones as Linda.
The tramp with the wedding ring.
I got sort of a nutty call on hold, Chief.
Who is that?
The guy says he's a clairvoyant. Says he wanted to help us solve the case.
Thanks. You having one?
In a bit.
You know, I think Illeana might suspect something.
Oh, I don't. Oh, honey, lamb. My poor honey, lamb. Oh, it practically kills me to see you like this. Oh, Rachel. Oh, I didn't mean that. Oh, God. Daisy, no. No, Daisy. What are you doing? Daisy, don't do that. Daisy. This is really so Stop, Daisy.
Hey! I'll be around.
Teach me to read. Joseph Miggs. Everybody calls me Miggs.
Miggs.
That's my name. Don't wear it out.
It's a ridiculous name.
Ain't it?
My artistic integrity, okay?
Audiences want to know it's you, Bruce. They expect it. And we're talking about a lot of money here. You know,
What are you talking about? They're not going to recognize me, Ben? Oh, where'd Bruce go? Huh? Can't see Bruce no more. Oh, where's my favorite movie star? Oh, look, there he is. I see him right there, the guy with the beard.
I want you to look me in the face and tell me that nothing happened between you and Jason. school, and I tried to warn you.
Is this what you had in mind for a retreat from the big bad city? You're talking as if I've done something. I did not molest Jason Williams.
Or are you afraid to trust me alone?
Can't you stop talking like that? I think you ought to take a nap. I'll go out and help Jamie bear up. Oh, I love to lie in the shade and watch him work.
Eleanor Strubing's story is nothing less than tragic. She was a respectable woman from a fine family. She attended the best schools. She went to church each and every Sunday. As the good book says, she was spotless as the Lamb of God.
She is spotless as the Lamb of God.
You're right on time. Hi.
Hello.
You're even handsomer than on TV. I'm sorry I'm late. I had to run around and get my New York Times. They only get 3 a day in this town. Can we stop upstairs before we go to the penitentiary?
Wait a minute. I only agreed to come and talk today.
Oh, my God, but I told Felix you were coming. What happened? I sent you the transcript.
Yes, and I read it.
Well, I've got stuff you've never even imagined.
They were first detained by officers of a survey brig off the coast of Long Island. Can only assume that the charge is murder.
We do hereby claim salvage on the high seas of the Spanish ship La Amistad and all her cargo.
Your Honor, here are the true owners of these slaves.
These slaves, Your Honor, are by rights the property of Spain.
You and this young so-called lawyer have proven you know what they are. They're Africans. Congratulations. What you don't know is who they are.
This could take us all one long step closer to civil war.
Immediately surrender these goods!
Our president has appealed the decision to our Supreme Court. We have to try the case again.
I will call into the past and beg my ancestors to come and help me, for at this moment I am the whole reason they have existed at all.
Put your hands down, will you? You're embarrassing us.
You don't even love her, man. You don't love her.
I don't know what you thought or what you are, but I know what you've done. You've murdered.
I had to get in to meet Margot. I had to say something, be somebody, make her like me.
How can Dick Widmark convince Doris Day that the baby who looks exactly like him is their baby when she knows she didn't have it?
Why the hell are you married to me? What the hell are you doing carrying my child?
His body was never recovered from the lake after he drowned.
Calling on all the spirits of everyone who's ever died in this house. Jessica.
Okay,
What?
next step. What is it? Write a poem, hold hands in public, sing a serenade.
Sex.
We should just get our things and go.
Filled with sun, full of sadness, or with fun. It's a thrill when you're the lucky one.
It happened to Jane.
I know what you need. Come here. You need a partner. And I'm gonna see that you get one.
Look, Daddy, teacher says every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings.
That's right.
May your days be merry and bright, and may all your Christmases be fine.
Well, Illeana, I don't know if you know this, but you're an Emmy-nominated actress.
Yes, 6 feet under. Go on.
A writer, producer, director of films, and author of 2 books. In her 5 decades in front of the camera, she's worked with the most respected filmmakers and actors in the industry. As a host on Turner Classic Movies, she's illuminated the early influence of female directors on the medium. Her first book, I Blame Dennis Hopper, is a lively memoir about her inevitable pull into the film industry. Please sit back and get ready to enjoy some film education because Illeana is a Quentin Tarantino-level cinephile. Our discussion tonight will only scratch the surface of the fascinating wealth of information that's in her book. So please, if you're unable to get a copy tonight, go to the Riverbend Bookshop and order one, or if you feel like supporting some soulless billionaire, you can go to Amazon and get one there. So let's all have a round of applause for Illeana.
Thank you. Thank you. I am on, right? Testing, yes.
All right. Can everyone hear us both all right? All right. First of all.
Hi, Bolton. It's my first time in Bolton, so I'm very sure. Okay.
First of all, can you tell us about the circumstances that led you to writing this book and led you to moving back to Connecticut?
Yes. Well, I never had thought, again, about writing a book about Connecticut. I did grow up here. And the genesis began during COVID, and I wanted to write an extended essay about The Swimmer because one of my first jobs in show business was I got a small part in a Frank Perry movie. I was working for a film publicist down in New York City named Peggy Siegel, and we shared our offices with Frank Perry. And one day they'd forgotten to, believe it or not, it's just like a bad PR write-up. He'd forgotten to cast a day player role. He came in the office. He was like, you're an actress, right? And I said, yeah, and he goes, great, I got a part for you. How'd you like to yell at Shelley Long? And I'm like, who doesn't want to yell at Shelley Long? And, next thing I knew, he was, I was literally got in a car with them. They handed me, lines. This is what you do. So it became kind of a funny story on the floor and everything. And so I struck up a friendship with Frank Perry. And at this point, he had done Mommy Dearest, which he was just at the point where he was having mixed feelings about it. There was a huge poster on his wall. He had just done a movie called Compromising Positions, which had not done as well. Now Hello Again was not doing as well. And I think he began to get very frustrated about, where he would. There was no real, there was no internet then. So I don't think people knew about all of his, early 60s films. So he began to talk to me about his early films and sent me all of his VHSs, to look at and to kind of discuss with them. And of course, when I saw The Swimmer, whenever you see The Swimmer for the first time, you're just like kind of blown away about it because as we were talking before, it's not really so much a movie as it is some kind of wild hallucination, And
can I ask, actually, how many people here have seen The Swimmer? That's a good number.
Yeah. It's become more popular, but back in 1987, I mean, I'd never heard of it, and I was blown away by it, and the idea that it was about Connecticut and this idea of identity and misplaced values, and I related to quite a bit of it. Again, growing up in a wealthy community where we were considered, dirty hippies. Now, having goats and things like that's all very in, but 1969, it was not very cool. But so now cut to the present, and it's COVID. And I write this extended essay about for The Swimmer for a group I'm a part of called Trailers from Hell, which is a wonderful group. If you like movies, they write about films. And it went over very well. And then as COVID went on, I said, well, let me take a different track now. Now I want to write about, everybody knows about, the blue-blooded side of Connecticut. Let me try to write, again, more about the industrial side of Connecticut, which never really gets mentioned in movies except there have been movies, made about the industrial parts of it. And so then I wrote Stanley and Iris. I had a bit of a family connection. The director was Martin Ritt. Martin Ritt had directed HUD. So again, I always kind of write from a little bit of a objective, subjective point of view. And when I really started writing about Stanley and Iris, that's when I really knew that there was a book in this, because again, Waterbury to me was the place you drove by on your way to New York. I never stopped or spent any time in Waterbury. And the more I started to do research about it, why do they call it Brass City? What does the Naugatuck Valley mean? What did it mean to America? The amount of immigrants that live there. It is brought up in Death of a Salesman. It becomes like a very important part of Death of a Salesman. Rosalind Russell was from Waterbury. The Palace Theater hosted all sorts of actors. And so what I really saw was this vibrant, incredible city that somehow, when industry ended, the town ended. And that's when I said, okay, I want to write about these movies, revisiting these movies, but through the lens of these different communities in Connecticut. So much of Connecticut, I actually, I grew up in the old Saybrook area, and I really, I left, I was only 16. I only could go as far as my bike would take me, and occasionally, my mom would bring me places, to see movies. But so there was a lot of the state that I hadn't seen. And so that's when I started really taking apart the book and saying, okay, this is going to be like a road trip through the state, and you're going to learn about the movies, but you're also going to learn about the community. That was what was really important for me, to kind of salute the state and the diversity of the state that I don't think people were aware of.
Certainly, yeah. I think most people just see Connecticut as that, blue blood, Westport.
Right. And some of that is because, again, we have such a history with these, with the movies and kind of suburbia and dark suburbia films. But I also, I wanted to tell the story of, nowadays when you see a movie and you see a couple and they're in a car and they're headed for Connecticut, something really bad's going to happen to them. Their house is going to be haunted, or they're going to hate each other, just something. But I wanted to find out, well, how did we get here? And so let's go all the way back to the beginning. And how did Connecticut become this place? And a lot of it, again, has to do with, which we'll talk about, how each filmmaker used Connecticut in a different kind of a way. And as America changed, Connecticut changed. And the movies sort of reflect how it got darker and darker and darker until you get to The Swimmer, and it's like the whole suburban life is deconstructed. And so therefore, after that, there's almost nowhere to go except for horror. Like suburbia is now horror.
And
it is. It's what we see in movies,
Taking it all the way back to the beginning, I would assume most people think that the film industry started in Hollywood in California.
Yes.
But something that's very illuminating about your book is tracing some of the origins of film to Connecticut. Can you talk about that?
It's really incredible, which was a revelation to me, too. I thought, well, I knew that Way Down East, which was a D.W. Griffith movie, was shot in White River Junction and also in Farmington.
And that's like 1905, I think, right?
Yeah. And what's great about that movie is that the owner, D.W. Griffith, was always very, he'd be very friendly. He'd find some wealthy person who had a mansion and then convince them to shoot, at his place. And so
it's a good move.
Yeah. So in Way Down East, if you ever want to watch that silent film where they shot, the owner, he was in the mill business, so you will see prominently again and again shots of his successful mill. And but going back to the silent era, I thought, okay, I knew there was that movie, but I was surprised that many of the films that were shooting in New York City and Astoria, if they needed to shoot the countryside, they would just come up to Greenwich. So they shot a lot of movies in the parks around there. There was a very wealthy guy who named like C Commodore or something like that. But anyway, he had mansions, and so D.W. Griffith would shoot on his mansion, and so there are various, again, turn of the century. I guess like turn of the century, building your own castle was very important. So Connecticut has a lot of these sort of 1900 style castles. And so in Greenwich, they shot a number of silent films, again, Romeo and Juliet, Cinderella. And what's amazing about Connecticut is that if you go to these places, like if this were Hollywood, you would go to this place and it would be a parking lot. There wasn't a place that I wrote about where you actually couldn't like drive down the driveway and go, oh my God, there's Millstreams. I can't believe it. That was in, way down east. Like there it is right there. So that's what kind of makes it fun too. And again, you can get to see, if you're a history buff like I am, not only the movies, but again, this connection that New York has with Connecticut, wealthy people that would move here and have their mansions or their country houses. That relationship I find to be very interesting. And you always have, going back to the silent era, you have wealthy people supporting filmmakers. In the mix of all of this, you also have William Gillette, who was, doing Sherlock Holmes. And I tried to tie together, again, when I do talks in Los Angeles, no one has any idea that William Gillette basically created the persona of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, can you just give a little more information about that? Because I didn't know that until reading the book. I always knew that he played Holmes, but I didn't know all the details that were specifically him.
Yeah, he was... he grew up in Hartford and was an actor and read the book and decided he wanted to play it. I guess because in those days, like Eugene O'Neill's father, if you found one good role, you just played it till they Count of Monte Cristo. Okay, I'll be doing that for the rest of my life. So he wanted to be Sherlock Holmes, so he took the book and got Doyle's permission, I guess, to elaborate. So he came up with the line "Elementary," "My Dear Watson." He came up with the hat and the pipe. I think one of the reasons he didn't use a cigarette was because he part of the reason he's holding the pipe is he couldn't say his line. So a lot of these affectations came about from him doing the stage work. But so this was something he performed on stage, but then it was when I guess when he was in his 70s, they wanted the Esnay company out of Chicago wanted to get a record of it. So there is, if you go on YouTube, you can actually see William Gillette playing Sherlock Holmes, which was quite interesting.
Yeah. Something I really love about your book is the way that you characterize Connecticut and its sort of evolution over the years.
Yes.
Pretty much after the silent film era, I think the first era that you track starts. Could you describe that era for us?
Well, so after we get the silent movies, and then now everybody's in Hollywood sort of making movies, but concurrently on Broadway, you're getting a lot of successful actors with money now able to buy their little country house. And then what I found interesting about this is you get these little artistic communities that are still intact today, Westport, New Milford, and where you have people. There was a wealthy heiress, again, named Alice Delamar. She was housing George Balanchine. She was supporting people. Eva Le Gallienne was another actress that she supported. People started coming here. Noel Coward spent time here writing, as did F. Scott Fitzgerald. So Connecticut is becoming that sort of artistic haven where you get away from the rat race. At the very same time, you have these movies that come out of Hollywood that are all where the plots are all exactly alike, where you have a a man. It's usually a man, and he's from a wealthy banker family, and meets a girl, and she's from Connecticut, and then finds this sort of authentic experience spending time in nature and in the country, and this again has these organic roots. At the very same time, as I said, the Westport Playhouse is now putting on plays. And the group theater is here in the 1930s. They're in Tallinn. They're rehearsing Broadway plays for New York. But so movies like that, which are bringing up baby again, there's a lot of little Connecticut, under the surface. Like the character that Cary Grant is based on was a real person named O.C. Marsh, who basically coined the Brontosaurus, what we call the Brontosaurus. So in the movie, you have Cary Grant, who is a paleontologist, who is working on on the Brontosaurus. And again, sadly, they have the Museum of Natural History in New York, but what it's actually a replication of is the Peabody Museum in New Haven, and they even have a character named Mr. Peabody. So there's all sorts of little threads that Hollywood is picking up on this kind of idealist, idealist way that Connecticut is presented, and it culminates in the most over-the-top brand Connecticut movie of all time, which is Christmas in Connecticut, where now you have people, arriving on a horse and sleigh and living in a gigantic barn, but that has 1940s style appliances. They were mixing, so they were creating this kind of brand for us, where you have all the Connecticut Yankee stereotypes, the spinster, the kind of drunken caretaker, the rich, wealthy aunt, the heiresses, and you have all of those people, but the house becomes central. So it moves, the next transition is it moves a little bit away from being out in nature, which was the first series of films, to now it becomes much more about the house. And again, to this day, we still have that image and that idea, the perfect country house in Connecticut. And it would shift again for Blandings. We'll get to Blandings, but Christmas in Connecticut becomes where a woman she's a career woman, a career gal, but comes to Connecticut and finds, sees this house and falls in love with the house, and gets in touch with her more womanly side. The only thing I want to say about Christmas in Connecticut, which again is completely bypassed, is it was based again on a real life person named Gladys Tabar, who lived in Southbury, and she was kind of the Martha Stewart of the day. She was a columnist in Good Housekeeping, and a lot of the elements of the film were just basically ripped off right from her life. I guess people didn't care about rights in those days, but if you read about Gladys Tabar, she is the model for the Elizabeth Lane character in the film.
Could we talk about Katharine Hepburn for a minute? Because you kind of say that she exemplifies the Connecticut woman, and that she was basically ambassador to Connecticut during the country comedy era.
Yes.
How do you think she influenced just the way that a Connecticut woman was seen, and even the sort of gender roles in bringing up baby?
Well, I mean, again, she exemplifies, her family was, very wealthy. She grew up in Hartford. They had a beautiful mansion in Old Saybrook and Fenwick. So she very much had that, she is the one who she introduces the patrician accent into Hollywood. Nobody had that accent before her. And she was just being herself, but that translated in films. So when you see her in a movie like Bringing Up Baby, her wearing pants, her hair is very kind of wild. She's the sexual aggressor. She's the one who's chasing after Cary Grant. She's kind of fiercely independent. She has her own look. She doesn't really care the way she looks. All of these qualities are what the studio absolutely hated about her. And after bringing a baby, in fact, that's when they dropped her contract. She ends up going back to New York. She buys Philadelphia Story, comes back, and and then becomes a success. But within her, identity, that idea of her being fiercely independent, the patrician accent, always playing wealthy heiresses, I always joke and say, like, if you walk in downtown Old Saybrook, you'll see 50, Katharine Hepburns. Like, we all know them. They live in Old Lyme, and and they help out in the art galleries. And so, but that identity that she brought to Hollywood from that point on, whenever anybody was playing a wealthy heiress, they now would put on basically the Katharine Hepburn, patrician lockjaw accent, which really didn't exist before Katharine Hepburn. She sort of invented it in her own circle. So I just always find that to be funny. To this day, when someone is playing an heiress, they're vaguely doing a Katharine Hepburn accent.
Moving out of the 40s, suburbia is about to explode. And the movie that you focused on specifically for that, Mr. Blanding's buys Builds Dream House, excuse me.
Yes. Now, I don't know if people are aware, Mr. Blanding's Builds His Dream House, again, is based on a real house that's in New Milford. And the writer was named Eric Hodgins. New Milford, again, at this time, is a very, very interesting place. Henry Luce, who was the publisher of Time magazine, later Life magazine. Henry Luce is there living with his wife, Claire Booth Luce, again, talented writer. Eric Hodgins is working at Time, and he buys what he thinks is his dream house. It goes way over budget. He ends up losing the house because he goes so wildly over budget, and he writes a comical book about his experience. His neighbor just happens to be also the recently new head of RKO, Dory Sherry. Dory Sherry knows all about this story, again, because they're in these kind of literary upper class, circles where they're all artists, they all live in New York, but they all have country houses here. So Dory Sherry snaps up the rights to the book. Ironically, Hodgins actually, with his money, tries to buy back the house, but they won't sell it to him. He's devastated. He has to build a whole new house. But now it gets translated again through Hollywood. But what's interesting, what they got about this that was so correct, was they modeled the house that is in Hollywood, because the movie was shot entirely in Malibu. They built a whole house. It wasn't like a set. They really, the house now is in the Malibu Park. It's where the Rangers stay. So it's a real house. Unfortunately, it's not painted the way it used to be. But they model it on a classic kind of colonial house. It's anyone who grew up here, it's not quite colonial. Everything always had to have this kind of semi-modern twist. So it's more, because it was the 40s, it is more of like, I guess you would call it colonial revival. But it's close enough to being colonial. Looks very much like the real house that is in New Milford. And they also come up with this gimmick that they're going to build Blandings houses across America. So there's 4 Blandings houses in Connecticut. I very discreetly stood outside people's houses and took a picture of them. They look identical to the movie, which is already crazy enough. So Connecticut, again, when we plant the idea of what is the American dream, the White House, the picket fence, it is, in fact, the Blandings house that is in Connecticut. Now, the one little twist, which I think is the key to where things start to get darker, is that we now go from nature in Connecticut, finding your authentic self. Oh, wait a minute. perfect farmhouse in Connecticut. That'll make me happy. Now, when it gets to suburbia, what is very much for the first time introduced is you not only have to have the right house, it's got to be huge. It's got to have everything you ever dreamed of, and you can't be denied any of it. And also, it's got to be in the right part of the state. So it has to be next to the right kind of people. So we're now introducing again a little bit of that racist slant of getting out of New York City and moving to the wealthiest part of Connecticut. And what was the wealthiest part of Connecticut to Eric Hodgins and Henry Luce and Dory Sherry? A very exclusive area in New Milford. And so I just personally found that fascinating because, it was so reflective of where the culture was going. The movie was a huge success. They toured my grandfather they would go on tours throughout America, and they would have plans. You could buy the plans and have your own Blandings house. And so in these local communities, builders would build the house, and then all the businesses that would fill it with their rugs or their silverware or their curtains, and there would be advertising in the newspaper. And so people could only spend a quarter, and they could see the Blandings house, and they even had like food stocked from the local grocery store. And then at the end of seeing the movie, again, they're hyping you on this consumerism. They would auction off the house, and so you could live in your own Blandings house. And what I just again find so incredible about that, just as an aside, builders started getting creative and started adding their own little things like greenhouses. There's one in Ohio. You could have a bomb shelter, in it. And I love the idea that a Connecticut movie introduced the idea of superior living in Connecticut, which we have never now moved away from. So we could do 1,000 Stanley and Irises about, manufacturing, and we could talk all about manufacturing, which is another, part of the book that I devote to. But it was so successful. They branded us so successfully that we've really never, escaped any other brand than superior living in Connecticut. And some of the real estate at the 11th hour, there were some, because I had 300 pictures in the book, but I did have some from magazines. Again, after the movie, they started to introduce, again, this idea of superior living in Connecticut, in the right place in Connecticut. And again, from that point, then we're going to move into things start to get darker and gentleman's agreement and all of that. But that's where it begins. That's why that movie is so important to Connecticut. And the chapter also gives you a whole insight into what was happening in post-war America and why Connecticut was so vitally important in our sort of story.
And it even ended up influencing Hollywood itself, right? That became a design.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The faux Connecticut look, which again, when you look at these movies, and as I'm describing them, they have a gigantic fireplace, but yet within the beams and the stone, you'll always see completely modern appliances, up to date, and then the furniture, again, it's like braided rugs. It's never really quite colonial, but it began to, in Hollywood circles, be called the Connecticut look. And so houses started to be designed. Howard Hawks' wife wanted her interior of a house in what they would now call Connecticut look, which was a sort of a colonial, mashup but with a lot of chintz, and so it was basically an interpretation of Connecticut.
And one more thing about Blandings is just sort of the nutmeggers that are trying to screw them over at every.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that, as I experienced in my own life with the realtors. There's nothing more fun than watching a New Yorker, kind of get taken by the sly New England realtor. And I grew up here, so I'm sort of a ringer. But when I moved back here, everybody thought I was from, this Hollywood actress. So, I had to work my way around a lot of, workers that had that kind of Mr. Blandings mentality.
And from the 40s into the 60s, the portrait of Connecticut got to be a little more shallow and a little bit less puritanical. And this is the era of the suburban sex comedies.
Well, that's, post Blandings, you're now into 47, 48, the early 50s. That's when you get the movies again start to become a little darker. You have Gentleman's Agreement, which is about the covenants in Darien. You get a movie again, fascinating personality. This movie called Boomerang, which Elia Kazan makes. This is about a murder that took place in the 20s in Bridgeport. And it was all about the political corruption in Bridgeport. Thank God that's not going on anymore. Thank God that's so in the past. Bridgeport was so upset with the story of the murder, which I'll talk about, but they didn't even let Kazan shoot. They didn't in the city, so he ended up having to make the movie in Stamford. But Boomerang again is about this political corruption and this idea that they have that there's this this is all true, by the way. It's an unsolved murder. A priest was killed. And they had to pin it on somebody, and so they coerced a confession out of the soldier who had some mental issues, and the brought in this prosecutor. His name was Homer Cumming, and he went to speak to him, and he realized that the confession was coerced, and there was a lot of pressure on him to convict this guy. And when he went into court, all hell broke loose, because he said it's just as important to defend the innocent as it is to convict the guilty. And with that, he literally switched. I mean, that must have been in open court. He literally switches sides, and there's all hell breaks loose. The soldier, he ends up getting off. They're so infuriated by him, they run him out of Bridgeport. But the whole case catches the eye of FDR, who taps Homer Cumming to be our Attorney General. And again, this is his name in Connecticut history of somebody that we should really look at. You just can't imagine the courage that would have taken to defy, especially again growing up here and knowing about the Bridgeport and the history of Bridgeport. And then here you have this incredible story of somebody who bucked the history. And especially it's interesting when these things are still going on. So then, before even we get to the sex comedies, that's when those kind of stories. The next one is Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, which is again about, now we get this, because of once again this striving. The whole movie is about the wife is so hell-bent. They live in Connecticut, but she doesn't like the house she lives in. She wants to live in a bigger house in a better neighborhood. The same thing that was established, again in Blandings. And this causes sort of the breakdown of their marriage, of her forcing him into a job in advertising that he doesn't really want. He doesn't like the pressure. He is and it introduces, alienation in the marriage. He's now going off to New York. She's like the bitter housewife home in Connecticut. So they keep, this striving. And then as we get into the sex comedies, although they're all funny, no one's ever done a serious analysis of 60s sex comedies, but since they all take place in Connecticut, I said, what is going on here? Is it because the writers, and all of the writers of these, J. Preston Allen, she was married to J. Preston Allen wrote, she wrote with Hitchcock, she wrote Marnie, she wrote the screenplay to Marnie. So again, she was a very successful screenwriter, playwright, married to Lewis Allen, very successful producer. So she lives here. Peter DeVries was another writer. So one of them, was written by him. So they were living in Connecticut. And so when I tried to get into, which Georgia Axelrod, again, who wrote the screenplay for Breakfast at Tiffany's, also living in Connecticut, but also working on Broadway. So what I was trying to figure out is are the writers satirizing what they were seeing? Which I think they were. Like they seem to be cynically saying, this is what I see. Everybody's drinking. Everybody has everybody's fooling around. And they were kind of satirizing now the Connecticut lifestyle, meaning the husband's off in New York, the wife is alone. And every single movie has a kooky plot line where, boy, I had so much to drink last night, I can barely remember what happened.
But that's kind of almost a low point in Connecticut film, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would say by the time you get to The Secret Life of the American Wife, which you saw a clip of there, it's so tawdry. You have the wife. Basically, the plot line is that the husband, Patrick O'Neill, is he's a publicist for a movie star. The movie star doesn't even have a name, but that's Walter Matthau. And Walter Matthau, every day at 1:00, likes to get a visit from a prostitute, and so the wife doesn't. She doesn't feel Ann Jackson, who's married to Eli Wallach, who again coincidentally also had a country house in Connecticut, but so she plays the wife, and she doesn't feel sexy anymore because she says she's got the Connecticut look, since they left New York, and she's relegated to just driving her husband to the train station. So she's going to prove she can be the sexy hooker to be with Walter Matthau. Unlike all the other movies, which it's kind of like they mince around and nothing really bad ever happens. This one, yeah, she goes to New York. She sleeps with Walter Matthau. She feels better about her life. She comes home and everything's well, and her husband doesn't know, but it doesn't,
She got her groove back.
She got her groove back, exactly. Yeah. And then it culminates with that's 68. And by 69 through 1970, you can deconstruct No Further, which is The Swimmer, and then there's another movie which I don't know if anybody's ever seen, which is called Loving. Loving is like you need a shower after.
You made it sound pretty bleak, yeah.
And they advertised it as a comedy. They called it a comedy, Westport style comedy, and both movies take place in Westport. So it is again, and the Swimmer is about, this man who has been basically cast out of the wealthy group he is in. You find, he's starts the day off, and you think, you think it's this pleasant, jaunty guy. He reminds me again, and I wrote about this in the book, he reminds me of a lot of wealthy people that I knew that you'd go swim in their pool, but you knew better than to, ever asked for a drink of water, or you were always just very conscious of where you were and where you stood. So he's gonna, on a lark, he's gonna swim through all these pools to make it back to his place. And as he goes on his journey, you realize that each encounter, you realize, oh, he's a leper in this society. No, everybody, he's a drunk and doesn't have a wife, and his kids hate him, and it just gets worse and worse and worse as he inevitably gets back to his house. You realize, that the whole thing is a facade. And again, he's in advertising, so it shows sort of how he has ended up. So we trace that line from Blandings, where everything was great. Like Cary Grant comes up with an advertising for Wham, Wham Ham. He had the great house, a happy ending. There are now no longer any happy endings for anyone living in suburbia in Connecticut. And Loving is even is brutal. I mean, the brutality of Loving is almost, again, as they say, it's almost too hard to watch. George Segal is so likable that I think he gets away with it, but it's so destructive. It's 10 times darker than The Ice Storm.
And we are starting to run out of time, so
yes.
I guess we will end it in the hell of Ned Merrill knocking on a door that no one's answering. But I would like to open it up to questions to everybody here.
Sure,
Does anyone have a question in the audience? Anybody not too shy? I have other inane questions. Yep. My mother.
I was going to ask. I saw a little glimpse of rope.
Yes.
And that, what does rope have to do with?
Well, I'm glad you asked. The movie Rope is based loosely on Leopold and Loeb. Leopold and Loeb took place, the murder took place in Chicago. And one of the things I thought was absolutely fascinating about Alfred Hitchcock, again, was when he decided to make it a movie, he changed, rather than have it be Chicago, he has the two students going to Yale. And once they murder their classmate, the very patrician actor, whose name was John Dahl, they're gonna bury the body at Mother's house in Connecticut. And so I was fascinated by, why would he think it's much more sinister for them to be from Connecticut than Chicago? But although you don't see Connecticut in the movie, it plays a crucial part in the film.
Yeah, it's almost like this kind of dark cloud that they're eventually going to get there. They're eventually going to put the body there. It just feels like a very dark, I don't know, ominous thing in Connecticut in that movie.
Yes, very much so, because he's a product. He is now a product of growing up in Connecticut. He's become a murderer, We have this image of like, oh, well, his mother is probably wealthy, ignored him. And, you have all those things are implanted in your head simply by saying Connecticut. And so I demonstrate again and again and again how many times Connecticut is used almost as this imaginary character that you just get it, instantly. There's a movie I don't know if anyone has seen Ocean 11, and they have Brad Pitt when he's down on his luck. Where does he work? He's living in East Haven. I mean, as soon as I saw the movie, I was like, not New Haven, East Haven. We know what that means, for the writer, it's like we just understand it, right, right away.
Are there any other questions back there? Yes.
Illeana, it doesn't have to be from Connecticut. What's your favorite movie?
My favorite? Oh, it's too hard to pick.
I mean, at this point in time.
I mean, I always go back to the Charlie Chaplin movie Limelight. I mean, for me, I could, if I could only see one movie, on my deathbed, I'd probably watch Limelight. For me, it's the perfect film.
Tomorrow's a premiere in the Featherwood, the Willie Pass story. Where do you see the future of film going in Connecticut?
Well, hopefully, again, I wrote, part of the reason I wrote the book was I feel so many times that, again, there are certain movies that have been, made about Connecticut that, had to shoot in New Jersey or had to shoot in Buffalo. And they were really, Marshall's a great example. Wonderful film. It's all interiors because they couldn't shoot, they had to shoot it in Buffalo and because they couldn't get a proper tax credit. So part of my reasoning and even the movie Amistad, like the Amistad concentrates really on the trial, but so much of Amistad that is fascinating to me is what was happening during what people were living. They had they had people, the companions to the slaves were living in families. They had the slaves. I mean, they thought they were doing a good thing, but abolitionists would pay a quarter to go visit the slaves. And, so there were all sorts of good and bad qualities of that film that make it such a Connecticut film that, that the movie is only sort of one quarter of. And the fact that it was, a Supreme Court and it's fascinating within the history of Connecticut. So I hope that, more people utilize the state. Another example of a very low budget film that I came across, which I found absolutely fascinating, was called Bristol Boys, which was about the largest drug bust in Connecticut, which took place in Bristol, again, a very industrial sort of town. And so I love the idea of getting a broader view of the state, utilizing some of these empty warehouses. There's so much here in addition to, Mystic Seaport and New Haven pizza,
Like most of them shot in westerns, and you don't get too much eastern.
Well, you'd be surprised because, again, like the movie Parish was shot in Old Saybrook a lot, and also Had Lime. Let's Scare Jessica to Death is East Haddam, and It Happened to Jane is Chester. So, and then of course, Mystic Pizza, and that has its whole history. So you'd be surprised. I tried to cover in as many territories within the state. Even the movie The Man in the Net, which is Thomason, was very interesting. Why they chose that, I have no idea. But Thomason is a really interesting little town.
Well, the economics of Connecticut, what does that have to do with the movie making? I mean, they're not so many places that are like going to where Montana or other places to make movies. Is Connecticut conducive to?
Oh yeah,
making tax wise.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a misnomer that movies don't bring in money because, again, the money begins from the minute you start doing locations. An example of a movie maybe you don't know, was made in Connecticut, was Alfred Hitchcock's Stranger on a Train. Now, fictional Medford is in fact Danbury. And so that whole ending sequence of the movie is the Danbury State Fair. So you can imagine, again, even back in the day, again, economically, you've got prop people, you incorporate all the local people into building sets, the crew, et cetera. Everybody just thinks like, oh, the actors get coffee and it doesn't really even bring much money. It doesn't exactly work like that. I mean, when a movie comes to town, it's essentially like an army. In my book, I write about a movie called It Happened to Jane, in which they basically they utilize the entire town. The entire town is in the movie, working as extras. They were prop people. They needed them to replicate a train, the old 97. So they have people that worked building the train, and we're really into it, again, because you don't quite have the cynicism of being in Hollywood. So I think I always believe in arts and bringing people together.
All right, I think we have time.
You know, encourage it and welcome it.
It doesn't seem like that lately. I mean, although when I did a film here in around, I think it was 2010, I shot a movie called The Green in Guilford, and it was just a blast. I mean, everybody opened their house, and we had the fire department giving us, doing rain for us. And again, you have every element of the town. You need police to direct traffic. So it really is a pretty large money-making operation. And plus, I think it's fun for people. It's a little bit like the circus. Exactly. I mean, look at Mystic Pizza, a lousy pizza place gets, gets to be. I mean, they kept that train going for quite a while.
All right, so I think we're just about out of time for questions, but if we can all give Illeana a round of applause.
Thank you.
And please, let's file through there and buy her book and have her sign it.